Cuba. What is the deal with the long-term Cuban struggle for the availability of the World Wide Web, and what is a weekly package? Let's take a look at how the unique island internet lives thanks to evasion of prohibitions. In Havana, you can easily see couriers in a hurry trying to fulfill an order. They can deliver to clients not only food or parcels. Often the couriers deliver bundles with hard drives. It gives the owner access to a huge amount of very different content. Movies, video games, TV series, music, and all kinds of apps. Because of the difficult and hard fate of the internet in Cuba, it's not so easy to get access to all that. This is called a weekly package. A hard drive with a terabyte of freshly downloaded internet. For locals, this is a good offer, because for a large part of Cuba, a permanent, stable and cheap internet is an unaffordable luxury. The beginning of the Cuban internet can be considered 1996. It was the year when the economic crisis due to the collapse of the USSR continued to storm Cuba. The first internet connection was installed in the country. Its speed was only 64 kilobits per second. However, to put it mildly, not the warmest relations of the socialist government with the United States didn't allow to increase the technical potential to develop the internet. Many in the Communist Party were suspicious of its American origin, seeing a potential threat to the country. Restrictions didn't begin immediately. In the early 2000s, the internet was rapidly spreading through the universities of Cuba, and since higher education is extremely popular on the island, not only researchers, but also students began to get acquainted with the web. The main changes came in 2002, when the sale of computers to private individuals was banned on the island, and in 2006. Then Ramiro Valdez became the new Minister of Informatics and Communications. He was a living legend of the revolution, who in his youth became friends with Fidel Castro while serving time in the same prison cell. A huge proponent of violent methods and repression, he gained the status of an influential official of the regime. In his new position, Valdez acted aggressively. He promoted a law prohibiting all Cuban companies from accessing services with free email and chat rooms like Gmail and Yahoo. The reason was as follows: these online resources can be used by American enemies for industrial espionage. By 2008, there was one internet cafe for citizens in the old Havana area, the cultural and historical center of the capital. A small room hidden in the corridors of the capital charged $3.50 per hour of internet use, an unthinkable amount for most Cubans, who then received an average of $20 per month. To access such cafes, it was required to provide passport data and address. The manager copied it. If, during use, a person entered words in a document or browser that were included in the list of prohibited words related to politics, the program was closed, and a person would receive a notification that the program was closed due to state security violation. At the same time, civil servants were given full access to the internet, and they shared it for a fee with those who wished. Usually the client used the service at night, when the speed is better. The most powerful computer of the top technological university of informatics has passed into the same illegal use. Through it, students downloaded everything, from American TV shows to articles or videos critical of the government, and then distributed them to acquaintances all over the island. Even such unstable access to the benefits of the internet formed an entire underground market, and the new generation was increasingly angry at the authorities for technological restrictions. Angry rather silently, expressing dissatisfaction at home or among friends. That is why the events of January 19, 2008 at the University of Computer Science seemed so unthinkable to many students. Ricardo Alarcón, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and President of the National Assembly, one of the most powerful people in Cuba, visited the university that day. He was speaking to an audience when student Eliezer Avila took the floor and began to challenge the official's words, criticize the Cuban regime and demand changes. The student asked why the residents of Cuba cannot afford to travel around the world, check into tourist hotels or access various websites. Avila's harshness impressed many, and the recording of his speech was probably the first viral video in the history of Cuba. But not really. After all, it was transmitted mainly not on the internet but on flash drives and via USB wires between computers. The idea for the future weekly package matured, and soon there were opportunities for its implementation. In March 2008, a month and a half after Avila's speech, they were allowed to own mobile phones, buy computers, and DVD players on the island. The changes were a gesture of goodwill by Raúl Castro, who replaced the country's leader Fidel Castro in office. Buying and activating a phone cost up to $120, which is about half of the average annual salary of a Cuban, but queues were still lining up for devices. The island's demand for technological change has finally begun to be met, albeit extremely slowly. Cuba couldn't bring underwater internet cables to the island, buy enough routers, and get other equipment. The US sanctions also affected the stagnation. Satellite internet solved the situation, but only partially. It remained costly and unstable. The solution was found in 2011, when they ran cables from Venezuela, and bought equipment from China. This was the beginning of a long friendship between Beijing and Havana. In the future, Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE put everything necessary for the internet to work on the island, up to routers and DPI-based blocking technologies. An underwater cable from Venezuela with a length of 1,000 miles was laid for 2 years, and in 2013 Cuba got fiber optic internet. Breaking, intermittent, and accessible to a minority of people, but it worked. And in 2015, a tourist walking through the historic center of Havana could easily stumble upon a cluster of people buried in their phones on benches and under trees in parks. Everyone wanted to finally try out the public Wi-Fi points that appeared in the country. By 2016, the number of Wi-Fi points in Havana reached 85, and an average of 200,000 people used it daily. Prices have also decreased. For an hour of surfing the internet, the provider now asked for $2 instead of $4.50. In Cuba, they usually pay for the time spent, and not for the traffic spent. Still quite a high price for permanent use, but sufficient for small matters and communication with relatives. Teenagers, students, adults, or the elderly, everyone came here with smartphones or laptops to keep in touch. The place on the bench was valued and guarded by the lucky ones. Someone would hide under a tree, and groups of friends would settle on the grass. And there you can always find resellers of internet cards. To use the mobile internet, you need a card, but not everyone is ready to stand in a long queue for it at the provider's office. Moreover, there are often not enough for everyone, so profiteers have always worked in Wi-Fi zones, ready to sell a card right in the park. Usually for twice the price, but you can try to bargain. There was another serious problem. A slow connection couldn't cope with the demand. Authorization took time. Even when it started working, the connection dropped and slowed down while precious minutes of purchased time went into the void. In other words, it was impossible to dream of downloading large content or even watching a video on YouTube in good quality. In the realities in which the Cuban authorities couldn't, and didn't really want to, provide citizens with high quality and affordable internet, people learned to solve problems on their own. That's how the weekly package appeared. Thanks to the package, Cubans were able to download anything from the internet, or rather, almost anything. The organizers diligently ignore political, religious or pornographic content in order not to attract the attention of the authorities. In fact, the smugglers remain neutral. Some members of the Communist Party use the package themselves. Formally, the business of the package in the country is not prohibited, but it's not allowed either. Thanks to that, the industry for selling the internet on hard drives has become, according to Western media estimates, the largest private organization in Cuba. At its peak, half of the population of the 11 million country used its services, bringing in up to $1.5 million a week. And the need to distribute goods, mainly through couriers, provided jobs for up to 45,000 people. Many aspiring musicians, artists or filmmakers use the package to make a name for themselves. They pay according to the price list. Each seller assigns it independently, and in return their content ends up in a special folder. Which one? Depends on the payment. You can find yourself both in the most popular, where reality shows and blockbusters are usually stored, and in the most cheap, where funny videos with animals are placed. For example, here is the 2020 music video of the band La Diosa with a distinctive line: "If you are not in El Paquete, you do not exist." However, with the development of communications in Cuba, the package is increasingly fading into the background, but remains a substitute network for people of lower income or less tech-savvy users. Often the sellers of the package themselves install applications on the client's phone or explain to him how not to get lost in dozens of different folders in the catalog. And what about internet censorship? It has always kept up with the development of the network on the island. But the main challenge for the authorities occurred 2 years after the arrival of mobile and home internet in Cuba. In the summer of 2021, the largest rallies in the last 30 years were held in the country. Thousands of people in various regions opposed the food shortage and the actions of the Communist Party. Messages about the rallies quickly flew around Cuba via social media, because by that time 7.7 million Cubans had access to the internet. The protests broke out, among other things, thanks to Facebook streams, where the protesters broadcast what was happening on the streets. This fact seems banal for residents of developed internet countries, but it wasn't possible to imagine such a thing in Cuba a few years ago. The protests were the result of a severe economic crisis. Both additional U.S. sanctions and the COVID-19 pandemic contributed to it. Because of the latter, the tourism industry, which is important for the budget, was frozen. Since then, it has become even more common for Cubans to stand in queues for hours for basic goods like chicken or detergents. Immediately after the first wave of protests, the authorities turned off the internet in the country until they pacified the protest. A month after the June rallies, the Cuban authorities banned the dissemination of fake or offensive information on the internet. And what about now? The degree of internet penetration in Cuba has increased from 40% in 2015 to 70% in 2021. Due to U.S. sanctions, Cubans can't pay for foreign goods on the internet and are essentially cut off from the global financial system. Thanks to this, cryptocurrency is rapidly spreading in Cuba, penetrating into the everyday life of both ordinary citizens and officials. The development of the internet in Cuba continues to be seriously hampered by its high cost while salaries are pretty low. By 2022, on average, locals earn $163 per month. After the summer protests, the fate of the Cuban internet has become much less vivid. Having confirmed their long-standing fears about the power of the internet during rallies, the authorities are ready to act tough. They suppressed all resistance and in January 2022 engaged in political cases. The trial of more than 60 protesters accused of trying to overthrow the government has begun. At least 5 of them are under the age of 16, and in total more than 620 people are waiting for the trials. Hundreds of trials are the result of the largest civil protests against the Communist Party since 1959. Participants in the unrest can get up to 30 years in prison. But will the Cuban leadership be able to return to pre-internet stability? Let us know what you think about this in the comments, and see you in the next video on our channel.